entertaining or informative shiur. Today we will look at the Seder. And let's look at how to be ready so when your Seder comes around next week, you are fully prepared and you know what to do. I think the Seder for many people is the highlight of the year. Many of our fondest memories revolve around the Seder. True? The celebration of the Seder this year is, thank God, better than it was in the previous years. In the last few years, at least 2 years ago, was a total lockdown. Last year we did have our retreat, but still some people struggled. Many people were still in some form of lockdown. But I think by now the government has relaxed the rules, haven't they, yesterday? I don't know all the rules yet. If somebody has any insight for me to tell me what the rules are now. I don't think you have to be wearing a mask anymore. Outside. Inside you do? Okay, gesundheit if you want to wear a mask. With pleasure. So, if you spent Pesach 2 years ago alone, listen, alone can have its own benefits. And in fact, I could tell you some more stories about Pesachs done alone, and there were people who certainly have celebrated their Pesachs by themselves, and they still had a meaningful and a purposeful experience on their Pesach. In fact, I'm trying to think which year it was, but there were some Pesachs. One year there was, what was the disease that year? Early 1900s. Was it Spanish flu? It could be. Was Spanish flu then the major concern? There was another one in Russia. I'm forgetting. Pardon? Yeah. Well, this story comes to mind. Next week is the Rebbe's birthday. Okay? The 120th year since the Rebbe's birth, so this story certainly comes to mind. The Rebbe was born on the 11th of Nisan in 1902. Okay? And therefore, 8 days later, his bris was due to take place on the 18th of Nisan, which was a Friday. The 4th day of Pesach that year. He was born in the city of Nikolaev in Ukraine. Have you heard of Nikolaev these days? It's in the media again. It's one of those cities that the Russians have invaded. And the bris was taking place in the house of the Rebbe's esteemed grandfather, Reb Meir Shlomo Yanovsky. He was the rabbi of the city of Nikolaev. And one of the attendees was a chassid whose name was Reb Usher Grossman. He was the city's shochet, the ritual slaughterer of meat in that city in Nikolaev. He refused to eat any of the food that was set up on the table. Why? Because during Pesach, he never ate food that wasn't prepared in his own home. So as we go into discussing the preparations for Pesach, that's something to consider about as well. Ladies and gents, I'm just going to ask you for a moment. I'm going to take a quick call. Sorry, I'm just going to put you guys on. Okay, sorry about that, guys. It's just one of our graphic designers here helping us with getting some things done. All right, where was I holding? Wasn't I telling you a story about The Rebbe's bris, yes? So the bris was taking place at the home of the Rebbe's grandfather, and meaning his mother's father. And here this man, this attendee, one of the participants, Reb Asher Grossman, he was a shochet in the city, and he refused to eat any of the food that was set up on the table, because during Pesach he would never eat food that was not prepared in his own home. Reb Meir Shlomo was upset by this, and he said to the shochet, Asher, truly you deserve to be reprimanded. After all, in my house, it is certainly permissible for you to eat. I am the Rav of the city. If you don't eat in the rabbi's house, we got trouble. But what could I do? I can't rebuke you, he said, because you once saved my life. Now everybody was curious. When did this Reb Asher save Rabbi Meir Shlomo Yanofsky's life? Rabbi Meir Shlomo was referring to the period in his life years earlier when he contracted typhus. Typhus. And at that time, there was no known cure for typhus. And the customary procedure was to quarantine the victim in a sealed area outside the city in order to prevent contagion. Exactly. In our parsha this week, we talk about tzara'as. A person who speaks slanderously about someone else. When we gossip about another, we cause them to be isolated because our negative words about them make others want to stay apart from them. So the Torah says the repercussion is a skin disease called tzara'at, which requires the person to quarantine, to be isolated from others. Mida keneged mida. An action, a deed for a deed. I spoke gossip, slandered somebody else, therefore I have to now be isolated for what I did to them. In this instance, now, by the way, that comment I can only say about myself. Never can I point my finger and say, you know why you are going through this trouble? Who am I to know why you're going through trouble? Unless I'm a prophet, I don't think I am privy to that information. But if you are privy to that information, please tell me which stocks to invest in. But for myself, I ought to do some self-introspection. I ought to look into myself and take a good look in the mirror and say, why is this happening to me? What have I done wrong? What could I fix in my life? You could do that for yourself. Your doctor could tell you what medically you could do differently. And you could tell yourself what spiritually you can do differently. In the times of the temple, you used to go to a Kohen. Only a Kohen was able to decipher, to diagnose that this was tzarat. A Kohen inherently, naturally, were kind-hearted people. So the Kohen was able to look at you with kindness, not to tell you you're such a gossiper and that's why this happens to you. But rather, out of kindness and mercy, the Kohen was able to help you diagnose your spiritual condition. But in this story, we're talking about the rabbi had typhus. Now, we could all relate in the last 2 years, some rabbis got COVID and had to quarantine and isolate and all the other rules and regulations related to COVID. Now, this rabbi had to stay outside the city. He was isolating, quarantining from typhus. And nobody was able to see him because they wanted to prevent it from spreading any contagion. Except for a doctor who came once a day to give him medicine, no one was allowed to go to that place where he was quarantining. Now you can imagine, it wasn't just that it was like COVID existed. He was suffering. We've seen in the last 2 years how sick some people have become. Literally sick. And how many people died from COVID. Here's this rabbi quarantining, abandoned, lonely, lying on a bed. Pardon? Yeah, absolutely. And people were dying from it. When Rameir Shlomo was stricken with typhus, he was taken to this place outside the city. And there he was, languishing in a cot in this shelter, I don't know what they called it, a hospice kind of place. But he was pretty much helpless. Virtually no hope, no help. When this Reb Usher, the Shochet, learned about his friend's desperate situation, he took a copy of the book of Tanya. Tanya is the primary text of Chabad Chassidus. And he went to his building where the rabbi was quarantined. And forbidden to enter the sick man's room, he stood outside. I remember not so long ago, but this past December, right, we mustn't forget how life was transitioning, thank God. But this past December, I went to visit somebody who had COVID and was in a hospital which would not allow visitors in. This man desperately wanted to talk to me because unfortunately he knew he was coming to his end. And he did. And so the week before he passed away, I went to visit him. He was in a hospice. They wouldn't allow anyone in. They said he has COVID, he's unwell. So I stood outside the window in the garden, and this man very, very weakly communicated with me. We said prayers together, and I was able to visit him from outside. Anything I wanted to give him, put through the window, and hopefully the nurse was able to lift it up and give it to him afterwards. So Reb Usher came to visit the rabbi and stood outside the room, or outside the window, and he read to him from the window, similar to what I was doing with this old guy. I was reading him the prayers and he was trying to say them along with me. And he read to him the book of Tanya from outside. He read the particular section, chapter 11 of Tanya. Chapter 11 of Tanya, it explains that there's to be only an absolute belief in the Yotzer Bereshis, in the creator of the universe, that is, that the creation, yesh ma'ayin, which means ex nihilo in Latin. You know what ex nihilo means? Well, I think more literally it means something from nothing. Ex nihilo. Out of nothing, exactly. Ex nihilo is out of nothing. That God Almighty created this world. And this creation wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't a single incident. But rather it's something that is constant at every single moment. God is creating and recreating this world. All creatures, including ourselves, are coming into being with God's wisdom. God is animating and vivifying and giving us existence every single minute. So when a person contemplates this idea and envisions his coming to be ex nihilo every single moment, then we could possibly think, how could we possibly think that we're really suffering or have any afflictions? Now, to tell you the truth, I'm personally in pain right now. I have a gout attack, my foot, as I'm thinking this idea. In chapter 11 of Tanya, it's saying we have to put our trust and faith in God. We have to realize God is in control of the world. And it explains there this concept that for the ayin, the naught, which is his blessed wisdom, is the source of life of our existence. Now, you really need true faith. As I say those words, the pain goes away. As I stop saying them, the pain returns. Over Pesach. I want to have whiskey, but the wine and the matzah and the meat, I don't know. Really? Now, when he finished reading this book and he was telling the rabbi that this perspective, that the pain and suffering comes from above, but ultimately it's for healing. It's for it realize that God's in control and God won't give you pain. Every day Reb Asher would come and read him this book, this chapter, every day for a whole month. And he didn't know if the rabbi heard him or not. He would sit there at the window outside the rabbi's room, and he would read this book, and he would just hope that it was giving the rabbi some encouragement. Just imagine that. And this daily inspiration had its effect. Because eventually, gradually, the rabbi's health improved until he recovered completely. And he later reported that each day after hearing those words of Tanya that he read to him, it lifted himself up. He would become stronger and healthier and better hearing those words, that inspiration. It injected a dose of inspiration to him. And when he was finally able to meet this Rab Asher, he said to him, "You saved my life. The reading of those holy words gave me the strength to overcome all the pain and all the depression that I was able to overcome this illness." So to think that this story, he remembers what happened during his quarantine. 2 years ago, Pesach, we were in quarantine, okay? The whole world was pretty much in quarantine. But the beauty of Reb Asher's act of kindness, which wasn't a one and done kind of thing. It lasted every day for a whole month. This shochet would visit the rabbi to try to give him chizuk, give him an injection of inspiration. And he did something tremendous, right? It turned out to be life-saving. A kindness without receiving any feedback. The rabbi was too weak to tell him then, thank you. So often, people do kindness to others, but it's somewhat conditional, right? Depending on receiving, did you say thank you? Did I get a smile? Do you respect me for it? Admire me. Look what I did. Reb Asher didn't get any feedback from the rabbi, yet he kept going. In Jewish tradition, the kindness that we give to somebody is tremendous. In fact, what's the greatest kindness you could do for a person? Anyone know what's chesed shel emes? You know what chesed shel emes is? The kindness that we do to a deceased person that's preparing a body for burial, donating towards somebody's burial expenses if they can't afford it, participating in a funeral. I officiated a funeral last week, and afterwards, I was talking to one of the guys. I asked him, it was a very small crowd, and this guy, I was chatting with him. I said, "So are you a relative? Are you a friend of the deceased, this child?" He says, "No, I don't know any of them." So, wow, that's very kind. What were you doing here? He said, "We have a WhatsApp group, and the Chaver Kadisha send us a message when they feel that they won't get a minyan for the funeral, and they ask us to come." How do you like that? They ask volunteers who say, "We'll come to help out to make sure there's a minyan, that there's dignity and respect in this burial, and that Kaddish can be said." Didn't know the deceased. Didn't know the family. That's called chesed shel emes, true kindness. And it's called that because when a kindness, that you do something for me and I could say thank you, you're getting something out of it. Right? When I do something for you and you respect me for it and I feel good about it, there's some kind of reciprocation going on here. But when there's no reciprocity, there's no returned favor, that's called chesed shel emet, a true kindness. Thank you very much, Ronnie. Really appreciate that. And to think that Reb Asher would come and visit the rabbi like that every day. So when you go to the hospital, you visit somebody, you say Tehillim with them, even though they don't hear you, it's still a tremendous kindness. You know, I'm reminded of a story. I don't want to digress too much, but it's just a story that comes to mind called The Rusty Penny. It's one of my favorite stories. When the Alter Rebbe had to collect money for a particular cause. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was to marry off a orphaned bride, or maybe it was to get somebody redeemed from imprisonment. Whatever the case was, the Alter Rebbe came to a particular town and he wanted to collect from people. And he asked the communal leaders, who should I go to? They said, we'll tell you who you shouldn't go to. There's this particular Jew who lives in this town. And this guy is the stingiest miser you've ever encountered. By the way, in last week's parsha, where it talks about the part of the tzarat, it says is also caused by stinginess. When a person isn't generous and kind to others. Anyways, the Alter Rebbe here is, don't visit this guy. He says, I'll visit him. And they said, oh, no. Anyone who comes to collect charity from this miserable miser, all they get is the same rusty penny. Alter Rebbe says, I'll try my luck. After all, I'm not up against too many others because all of you obviously feel that you can't get much out of him, right? Well, I'll try. Comes to his house, and the Alter Rebbe is welcomed in. The servants bring him inside. They take him over to the very fancy room where this very wealthy man, miser, is. And the Alter Rebbe tells him the sad story. This young girl, Nebuch, she was orphaned at a young age. Now she has to get married. She's marrying someone else from the orphanage. They have no money for a wedding. We want to give them a dignified wedding. You know, to pull off such a wedding would cost 10,000 rubles. They lived in Russia. So the man listened. He says, I feel really bad for this young girl. Poor young girl. She won't have a nice wedding. Shame. He says, I really feel for her. And he pulls out of his drawer his little money pouch, and he takes out a very generous sum of how much? 1 rusty penny. And he gives it to the Alter Rebbe. He says, here's my contribution towards the wedding. Now the other rabbis look, you see. He said, you guys be quiet. Alter Rebbe says, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you. You are so kind, generous, caring, loving, compassionate. Gives him every adjective you can imagine. And the Alter Rebbe writes him out a receipt for his rusty penny, as if he gave $1 million. The man takes the receipt. Feels really good. As the Alter Rebbe is about to leave, bids him farewell. They're walking out. The other rabbis say, you see, Alter Rebbe, what we told you. He says, leave it for me. Just as that, the man calls the Alter Rebbe back. He says, you know something? I want to give a little bit more. And he pulls out a little bit more, and he gives it to Alter Rebbe. Again, the Alter Rebbe bestows upon him blessings, showers him with all types of brachas. Says, thank you so much for your kindness. Maybe the Almighty reciprocate and shower you with abundance of nachas and joy and happiness. He thanks him as if he just got $1 billion out of the guy. As he's leaving, the man calls the Alter Rebbe back and says, how much do you say you need for this wedding? He says, listen, a wedding costs 10,000 ruble. I mean, today, 10,000 ruble, what is it, 150 ruble to a dollar? The ruble's in the air. When I went to Russia for Pesach 22 years ago, I think it was 30 ruble to a dollar. Now, anyways, the guy gives the full sum. The other rabbis were astounded. How did you manage to get this money out of him? So the Alter Rebbe said, he never knew what it feels like. He gives a penny, and what do the people do? They throw it back in his face. You give me a penny, you're making fun of me. I gave him the feeling, the goodness he felt of the recognition for his act of charity. And now that he realized how good it could feel, he wanted to give more. So I think it's that's a general idea. But why did I even mention this story? I'm sorry, guys. I didn't mean to digress. we were going to talk about the stringencies, the chumrot that people have on Pesach, that we like to be as stringent as possible. And so there are various chumras that people have. Sephardim, for example, eat kitniyot, legumes, corn, certain grains, rice. Ashkenazim do not. It's a chumrah, it's a stringency. Rice is not chametz. In fact, if the kids want to play with it, they certainly can. There was an activity we wanted to do at our Pesach program that involved some legumes. I checked with the Beis Din, they said, it's not chametz, you're allowed to use it, we just don't eat it. What about other chumrot? For example, in Chabad and many other Jews are stringent not to mix any liquid with their matzah. Again, that's not chametz. It's a stringency, a chumrah, to prevent chametz. No, we have fake kneidlach. We make out of potato flour. We make out of chicken, whatever it is, but not from matzah, except for the last night. But the point is, chametz, which symbolizes arrogance, which you discussed, and self-centeredness, and Pesach, we eat matzah, which is humility, because on Pesach we work now to eradicate our arrogance, our chametz. And this is the time that we spend preparing for Pesach now, getting ready. The beginning of all spiritual freedom and growth is the negation of ourself. It's known as bittul. Okay? Between me 1.0 and me 2.0, I need to have me 0.0. Okay, I need to find a way to be a little bit humbler. Okay, a little bit more humility in my life. And that's part of the symbolism of matzah. So even though Pesach 2 years ago, we may have been in isolation, we may have been in quarantine, but as you saw from the story, we come out of it, right? And we have to make the best of our Pesach holidays, regardless of our situations. If you get to celebrate with your family, noch besser. If you're celebrating with friends, beautiful. You know the story they tell about this elderly couple. Their kids all moved abroad, and they never get to see their kids for Pesach. They never get to see the kids all together. So this guy tells his wife, I'll sort it out. He calls his kids up in America and Australia and Canada and Israel. He says, I hate to ruin it to you, but I have to tell you that your mother and I are divorcing. 45 years of misery, genug shain. Must speak, it's enough. One of the kids says, Pops, what are you talking about? He says, we can't stand the sight of each other any longer. Enough already. We're sick of each other, and I'm sick of talking about this. So you call your sister in Toronto, and you call your other sibling in Ichveisnishvu in Sydney, and you tell them that this is the situation. Before you know it, they get a phone call from one of the kids. Says like, heck, they're not getting divorced at this old age. All right? The kids say, we're all coming to see you to sort this out. We'll be there tomorrow. You don't go anywhere. He turns to his wife. He says, sorted. The kids are all coming, and guess what? They're paying their own tickets. The Jewish commitment to celebrating Pesach is strong, and regardless, as you saw, which situations we were in, we've always made it work. You know, for us it was COVID, and for others it could have been in concentration camps, but we make it work regardless of the situation. Now, here's the question I want to open our discussion with. Like I said, I haven't really fully prepared this class. We'll have some more insights that I'll have to give you tomorrow. But ask yourself, what are the stifling elements in your life that seem to hold you hostage? Is there a certain person, perhaps, or a traumatic experience, maybe a toxic relationship, or crushing financial hardships? Try to identify 3 major antagonists in your life. And these we'll get back to in a moment to see how they apply and how our cleaning for Pesach certainly plays a role, because cleaning for Pesach isn't only getting rid of the physical leavened food, chametz, in your possessions, but it's also about a spiritual cleansing. A spiritual cleansing. Eliminating the ego, the negativity. Here's another point. If perhaps you could tell us what redemption might look like and how you would achieve it. What do you have to do to get there? Okay? So think of these ideas before we delve into some of the other preparations for Pesach. I thought I would read to you a little story, a diary from somebody who was I don't want to say a camper, a resident, a prisoner in one of the concentration camps, describing what Pesach looked like in 1943. I want to read this to you. He describes that people in the camp were already used to their miserable situation. They saw death before their eyes, but they asked, where could we get flour? How could we bake matzah? This is what was on their minds in a concentration camp before Pesach. And he describes shortly before Pesach, one of the SS men in the camp entered my workshop where I painted signs. He asked me to make dummy targets for target practice. Just then, an idea flashed through my mind. I claimed that in order to do this, I would need flour, lots of flour, to paste the pictures of soldiers on the targets. He asked me how much flour. I said that I would need 5 kilos of flour. He liked my suggestion and immediately gave me an appropriate referral. The Jews in that concentration camp went to work baking the matzah in secret, clandestinely, even though they knew that if they were to get caught, it would be their end. They baked the matzah in the oven in Pearl's workroom, keeping the door and windows sealed. When the night of the Seder came, 20 Jews managed to pull off a Seder, where aside from the matzah, they ate potatoes and drank homemade wine, which wasn't wine, rather it was a mixture of water and sugar. They even managed to read the Haggadah, even though they didn't have one. Each person would just share whatever they remembered. Imagine that. Yesterday I told you guys a story about Rabbi Kunin. Maybe to end today's share, I'll put it on the video because I found a video of Rabbi Kunin telling the story. He was a 16-year-old boy in that story, did not know the Haggadah by heart, but doing a Pesach Seder with a family that were sadly in a not good situation, he did whatever he knew by heart with them. And while the Nazis, Yamach Shemam V'Zichram, succeeded in destroying many Jewish lives, they failed to destroy the Jewish life of those Jews in that camp on Pesach that year. So when we talk about redemption, redemption could look very different for different people, different situations. In that camp, they achieved redemption by baking their matzah. Now, of course, even if it's not, thank God, the same situation as we had a year or two ago, COVID, thank God, is hopefully making its way away. But still, we have to get ready. Okay? And mind you, quarantine, as bad as it may have been, wasn't the end of the world. In fact, on the very first Pesach, we learn in the Torah itself, we were reading it here the other day, the verses, that while the Jews ate the Korban Pesach when they were still in Egypt, they were quarantined at home. They couldn't leave. They weren't allowed to go out of their house the entire Pesach evening, that very first Seder. In fact, there was a major plague going on. They couldn't go to a hotel. There were no communal elements of the Seder. Remember, we discussed the very first Pesach was a personal thing. Ever since then, the Torah describes you eat it together. Everybody would come together. It was a communal affair. All Jews in the times of the temple would come to Jerusalem. It was a major pilgrimage. But in the first Pesach, it was all at home. And although they were about to become a nation, they needed to realize that there was something special and unique about their individuality. Something we have to remember as well. As much as it's important to recognize that we're a community, we're going to go through a process in the next 8 weeks. Okay, 1 week of preparing for Pesach. And then starting next Saturday night, we start to count the Omer. Right? Sfirat Omer. What happens when you count the Omer? We don't just count the days. We make the days count. Pardon? There is a morning element too. That's the students of Rabbi Akiva. But the original story of the days of the Omer counting was counting down from our Exodus to receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. But, and maybe I'll leave this for another shiur, that entire counting period takes place during 3 astrological signs. The first, call it, what do they call it? A horoscope. What are we entering now? What period? What is it called? Aries? Or Taurus? Aries, good. Good. Aries comes first. That's Nisan. What's Aries? We're a collective nation. We're all in it together. But then there's also Taurus, there's the bull. The bull is very individualistic. And then comes Gemini, twins. The synthesis, the combination of both. In ourselves, when the Jews left Egypt, first they had to appreciate the individuality about the people they're with. And that's why the first Pesach was at home. Right? Nations tend to swallow up individuals. Everybody gets caught up. And this is why it's important that we celebrate Pesach with our family, wherever we are. But the message is very important. The family should be first. Okay? Because the original Pesach was families together. Now, this year, thank God, we are able to be back together with others. Still, don't let your guard down. COVID still exists. It's probably going to be with us for good. So whatever cautions you have to have, but still make sure that it's meaningful, that it's purposeful, that it's exciting. But remember, it is about the preparations in advance. You're taking the time now to prepare for Pesach. We say this not just about Pesach, we say this about everything. Nisha Tarach ba'erev Shabbos yochel b'Shabbos. The Gemara tells us, if you don't prepare before Shabbos, don't expect to eat on Shabbos. One who does toil before Shabbos is blessed, will enjoy. Today, we talk about symptoms. Everyone's concerned about, do you have symptoms? But symptoms that people are worried about, is it really the symptoms you're worried about or the virus? Right? It's not the symptoms. The virus itself is not observable. So we see if somebody's got symptoms, that's the concern. Because the symptoms indicate that maybe you have it. But let's put that aside. Let's focus on the positive. A basic principle of Kabbalah is that everything that happens in this world is actually a symptom of some sort of a spiritual energy that has been unleashed in the higher spiritual realms. So this is true about the miracles. When a miracle, such as the exodus from Egypt, occurs, it is because a special supernatural divine energy was present at that time. The physical exodus from Egypt was a symptom of the spiritual energy that was conducive for liberation, for freedom, for emancipation from our ancestors that was present at that time, 3,300 and nearly 34 years ago. So when we look at the calendar, which is circular, right? Every year, on every date, the same spiritual energies are present. So that same energy that allowed for the miracle of the Exodus 3,334 years ago is also present now. We have to tap into that spiritual energy, and then we could experience liberation, true freedom as well. So when you're thinking about your Seder celebration, you have to think that there's always a way to experience freedom regardless of the situation. And make it a personal freedom. That freedom should be something that you experience. The Torah tells us, V'higadeta levincha bayom hahu, that you should retell this story on that day. What is the Seder? It's not to commemorate, it's to reenact. We are not living history, but we're tapping into an existing reality. So an essential part of the Seder is a question we have to all ask ourselves. In which area of my life do I perhaps lack freedom? What am I a slave to? What habits or addictions, what unholy behaviors that limit, that enslave me, that don't allow me to maximize myself, my soul's potential? How can I become a better human being, a better Jew? That's the question I ask myself. And understand that the Seder is the time when we go free, right? So what am I doing now? I'm getting ready for Pesach to experience freedom. The Jews in Egypt didn't have the power to go free on their own. They needed divine assistance. And we too, even if we don't have the power ourselves, on Pesach we are granted divine assistance to be free. The energy is in the air. On the night of Pesach in Egypt, God told the Jews to do certain things that would allow them to merit to experience redemption. And these included eating matzah and maror. We do the same. And they facilitate the same results for us. So when we are getting into our Seder, we have to realize it's not just about remembering, commemorating. It is about reenacting in our lives. And you go to a birthday party. I was just at one the other day. There's usually a nice birthday cake, candles, and people sing songs, right? There's ways that birthday parties is traditionally celebrated. Now, imagine if someone were to ask, how much cake do we have to eat at the birthday party? How long does the happy birthday song have to last? You'd look at them like they're a bissel Meshiggah. Arab von Zinnen. For many Jews, the Seder is something similar. We get together, we celebrate, we nibble on the traditional foods, we eat some matzah, drink some wine, and go on. But one of the most important things to realize is that there is a right way of how to carry out the Seder. And that's what we're going to do for the remaining time today and tomorrow. That's what the word Seder means. What does Seder mean? Seder means order. Very good. And there's an exact order and a system to how you're going to celebrate your Seder on Pesach. Why do we use the Haggadah to say the right words? Should I say it again? Again. Why do we use the Haggadah on Pesach night? to say the right words. I say it quicker, to say the right words. Okay. Yeah. Say the right words. There are many examples in life. Think about a bride wants her wedding gown to be just so. And in sports, there are many rules to the game. And if you drive a couple of kilometers above the speed limit, you might get a traffic fine if you don't have the right documents in your car. You know what kind of documents you need? These days you need the R200 and the COCACOLA document. Okay. But if you do that, let's say you try to send an email and you miss one letter, is it going to reach its destination? Well, mitzvahs aren't any different. The nuances, the details of each mitzvah have meaning and they accomplish something. The amount of matzah, the timing of the seder, the items on the seder plate, each detail carries vast profundity. Just like that dot in, you're typing in your URL on the computer. If you don't type in www dot, are you going to get to the website? No. Still won't go. Now think of the human smile. Okay? One way of describing it is an upward pulling of facial muscles. But everyone understands that this only captures the external expression of a smile. The movement of the muscles are a reflection of an emotional feeling inside. And similarly, the actions of the mitzvahs are all reflections of something deep and profound. The details of the action might not seem significant when observed externally, but from the inner perspective, for what they represent, they make a huge, huge difference. And there's a famous Hasidic thought experiment. Let me share with you. Let me just see. I thought I put it up in here. Let me just find it. No. Okay. Chaim is a Jew who lives in Ukraine. Okay? What's going on there in Ukraine? They can't get matzah, they can't get wine, even though a lot of our matzah is coming from Ukraine. But he's stuck in Mariupol. He's stuck in some dorfel that's surrounded, that's besieged by the Russians. Okay? Pesach's coming next week. And he's awaiting for a UN food parcel, something. Somebody's going to send him. Okay, what happens if he doesn't get it? Please God, they'll be free by next week. But I'm just saying, just imagine. It's World War II. World War II, the world, people couldn't get things. Now, he's home alone on Pesach, okay? And maybe he's hiding out from the Nazis. Who knows where he is? He has no matzah, no wine, no charoset. But he's meditating on the meaning of matzah. Okay? He's yearning to eat it. But there's no matzah. What could he do? That's Chaim. That's Sasha from Russia. Okay? Now let's think about Chaim from Yerushalayim. Just bear with me as we make up the names. Chaim Yerushalayim is a very busy guy. Yeah. Okay? Now, he gets his matzah and he comes home exhausted Erev Pesach, right? He's just exhausted. He sees the matzah, okay? And he eats his matzah. He drinks some wine. He has a quick seder. And he goes to sleep. I'm going to ask you now. Who fulfilled the mitzvah of matzah on Pesach? No. If I asked you who had a more meaningful Pesach, it would be Sasha from Russia. If I asked you who fulfilled the mitzvah, it's Chaim from Yerushalayim. Okay? Even if you don't have all the social elements, even if you don't have all the meaning and meditations, what we're going to do here, even if I share with you insights and ideas, the main thing we want to achieve is to do it right, regardless of your kavanas. But at the same time, Sasha thinking is very important. God wants our hearts. God wants us to have a relationship with Him. When God notices a sincere effort to accomplish this, Hashem takes notice. There's a nachas ruach, a divine pleasure, and God reciprocates, even if we didn't manage to have a seder like, I don't know. So let's focus. Yeah. Let's focus. What are the main items on your seder that you need? What would you say the main items for your seder that you need to have?
Must have matzah.
You have to have matzah. Okay, what else? Wine, grape juice. Okay. What else? Okay, you see all these items on the screen here. Okay, the main things. Let's start your seder plate. Okay, number one we spoke about is matzah. Okay. What's that? Does somebody have a question? No. Okay. The next thing we would say is wine or grape juice, right? You have all those items as well? You have your matzah? Yes? If you don't have it, we'll have to help you arrange it. Wine or grape juice. Now, if a person is underage, you obviously cannot drink wine for health reasons. If you don't like wine, or perhaps you are diabetic, gout, okay, I don't know if the grape juice is better, but then you could drink grape juice. And what else? Your Seder plate, where did that go? Well, we'll look at the Seder plate in a moment properly. Okay, here's your basic Seder plate. Okay, we'll go through the items of it now as well. Let's discuss each of these items. Let's talk about the matzah for a moment. We did give a shir about the matzah last week, but we'll talk about it. It's a mitzvah from the Torah to consume matzah on Pesach. You know that. Particularly on the Pesach evening. We'll talk about halach manya in a moment as well. The Jewish people prepared dough on the night of the Exodus, but rushing to leave, they didn't have time to wait for the dough to rise. When they reached their first stop outside of Egypt, they quickly baked the unleavened dough and turned it into, I was going to say crispy, crunchy, yummy matzah, but I don't know if it was crispy or crunchy. I think it was more lafai. But either way, that was the matzah. At its core, matzah has only two simple ingredients. What are they? Flour and water. Okay, it's prepared and baked at a great speed, high temperatures to prevent the dough from rising, from leavening. Now we need 3 of these to set up a proper Seder plate. 3 matzahs are needed to have a nice Seder plate. Let's see if I can get my images here. Let's find a picture of a matzahs here. You need 3 matzahs, right? Got it? But depending how many people you are at your Seder, you might need more because everybody has to have a specific amount of matzah that they're eating. So 3 might not be enough. You have to eat a kazayit. Very good. But there's a few times. Now it's important to eat, what did we talk about last week? What type of matzah? Shmura matzah. That's the type of matzah that we discussed. It was properly guarded, protected from coming in contact with any water, starting from the time of Shat Kitzira, from the time of harvest. Okay, just a second, guys. Let me just take this. The matzah, we prefer handmade shmura matzah that is circular like these. There was a wealthy admirer of Chabad who once met with the Rebbe before Pesach. And he wanted a big project to donate towards. He said, Rebbe, I'm giving you a blank check. Whatever cause you want to support. And the Rebbe told him that he wants to buy thousands of matzahs to give out to non-observant Jews. Because obviously an observant Jew will already have their matzah. Okay, we're talking here about Jews who perhaps that's not on the top of their mind for whatever reason. And he looked at the Rebbe, he said, I wanted to buy a building, I wanted to do something major. Matzah to a stranger in the street, it's forgotten in minutes. I wanted to build a building or something impressive, support something big. The Rebbe said, if you're asking me what I think is a big project, then I consider this to be a big project, to give out matzah to Jews for Pesach. That's what the Rebbe considered to be a big project. That was his perspective of what's important. Let's talk about what else you need. What is it? Wine. Very good. We mark every Shabbos and Yom Tov by reciting Kiddush, which declares the uniqueness of the day. Our sages enacted that we make this declaration over a cup of wine because this prominent drink lends a special importance, a sense of importance to what we are doing. On the Seder night, the sages enacted that we drink how many cups of wine? 4 cups of wine at 4 different intervals. We'll get to those probably more specifically tomorrow. One of the reasons for this number is to commemorate the 4 expressions of redemption as we discussed. The Hitzesi, God says, I will extract you. The Hitzalti, I will rescue you. The Ga'alti, I will redeem you. The Lakachti, I will take you to me as a people. But if you do the Gematria, anyone here likes Gematria, numerology?
Yes.
The numerical value of the word Kos Yayin. It's 156. I'll try to put it in the slide tomorrow. 156. Okay, how many Kosot Yayin are we going to drink? 4. What's 4 times 156? Very good. 624 is the gematria, the numerical value of the word cherut, which means freedom. Okay? The deeper meaning of matzah and wine. As thinking human beings, we attempt to understand and appreciate the things that we do. And this applies, of course, to all aspects of our Judaism as well. The wine symbolizes this idea. Wine is something we could taste, right? You could savor, you could appreciate the flavor. Matzah, on the other hand, has been historically the food of the poor and the slaves. It's simple, right? If you don't have to be careful about chametz, it's just flour and water. There's nothing complex about its taste. And this symbolizes another element of our relationship with God. When we don't taste, we don't appreciate, we don't understand. Ultimately, Judaism requires a mix of both. We don't only celebrate our Judaism in a way that is limited to what we like, but we can't limit it to just following the orders by rote. So on the one hand is the matzah, which is simple. That represents simple faith. We follow the Torah, the instructions of God, simply because God said so. But then we drink the wine. We gain an appreciation for the flavor, for the taste, for the dynamics of the mitzvahs. Okay, faith and appreciation, you need both of them. Faith is matzah, bread of faith. They left Egypt in a hurry. It's just flour and water. I just do it whether I understand it or not. Wine, filled with flavor. It's robust. That's necessary to complement our Judaism. So now, when we look at the Seder, there are aspects of the Seder that we relate with strongly, and there are aspects that we don't as much. Let's embrace both. As we'll get into more ideas of the Seder, to realize that on the one hand, there are parts of the Seder that we appreciate, that we flavor. At the same time, there are aspects and ideas that we don't necessarily. Now, We talked about the kara. Let me put the kara back on here for you. My ke'ara, not kara.
Kara, it's a different meaning. Kara means cold.
Cold. Ah,
Kara, or
cold. Ah, but this is the kara. Kiara. Yep. Well, kara is the Seder plate. Yeah. Ke'ara. Some of the items that we place on it, okay, now let's think about it. So who mentioned the egg before? Okay, that's a universal custom. Everybody puts an egg. Okay, but others vary according to various traditions. So there are various customs regarding the exact placements of these items on your Seder plate. Different people do it different ways. What I will do, please God, bli neder tomorrow, is try to bring here a sample Seder plate. Bli neder, because I might forget. And otherwise, I'll put it on the screen. Okay. But mine is the Chabad way. You might have a different way. In fact, for now, let's just use this screen. We have the picture here already, so let's just use this. Our sages instituted that we have on the Seder plate 2 cooked or roasted items. And these are to commemorate the 2 main dishes that would be consumed during the Seder in the temple times. What are the 2 main dishes? There was the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagiga. So if you look in this picture that I put on the screen, is it big enough? Could you all see? The Korban Pesach is commemorated with which item? The lamb. So some people use a zroa, a shank bone. Other people use a lamb, whatever it is. Okay? A chicken neck. And others, the second one is the Korban Chagiga. Okay, which was what did they use for the Korban Chagiga? I mean, we commemorate it with the egg, but in the times of the temple, they offered a cattle or sheep as the Korban Chagiga. So on the top left of the Seder plate, we have a cooked egg, as you can see. That represents the Korban Chagiga, the festival offering, not the Korban Pesach, the festival offering. Now you're wondering, why specifically an egg? An egg is roundish, okay, which symbolizes the cycle of life. And as such, it's a food that is traditionally eaten by mourners. The egg on the Seder table is a symbol of mourning for the holy temple. We feel the absence of the temple so acutely, especially on Pesach. So the egg is like an item of mourning. What do we do with the egg? After we finish the Magid, actually after you do Maror Karech, the first item of Shulchan Aruch of the dinner is you take the egg and you dip it into salt water, and it's the beginning of the meal. On the top right, you see the Zeroah, which literally means an arm. God took us out of Egypt, bizroa netuya, with an outstretched arm. And this represents the Korban Pesach. It is a roasted piece of meat or poultry. And like I said, some use a shank bone, others use a chicken leg even, or a wing. I grew up always using a neck bone, yeah. But we don't eat this at the Seder. We miss it. We miss the Korban Pesach. We just look at it. Now, should we go into the middle of our Seder plate? Can you see a little bit better? Okay, that was the egg and the zra. Now let's go to the middle of the Seder plate. In the middle of the Seder plate, we have the maror, the bitter herbs. Okay, where did that come from? And the Torah tells us very clearly, al matzah umrorim yochluhu, that the Korban Pesach should be eaten on matzah. It was a nice lafa with lamb and relish, maror inside. So already in Egypt, when the Jews celebrated their first Seder on the night before they left Egypt, they were told by Moshe Rabbeinu to eat matzah and maror together with their korban Pesach. 3 foods symbolize the Pesach celebration of freedom. What are they? What we said before. The korban Pesach, as you can see here. And then you have the matzah that we discussed before. And the maror, the bitter herbs, as we're discussing now. So whereas the matzah and the lamb are overtly symbolic of our liberation, right? It's about freedom. The bitter herbs, they represent the agonies, the servitude in Egypt. The Mishnah lists 5 herbs that classify as maror. Now, while there's different customs, the Mishnah tells us you could use romaine lettuce. We traditionally use horseradish. What's that? Chrein, yes, ooh. You know, we used to sing a song to my, oh, Bubby, you know what I like. A Shabbos tish with gefilte fish with a bissel chrein on the side and the chillent in the pot and the kugel nice and hot. Okay, but that's not exactly. The Shabbos chrein is like a little bit reddish. It's got the beets in it. Not this one. No sugar, no beets. This is the real deal. Okay? Now, you might be thinking, romaine lettuce is not so bitter. Why do you use that in Chabad tradition, besides for the horseradish, which is bitter? Oh. Now, the truth is, I mean, you could go buy a Caesar salad, and it's not very bitter. But one explanation is that although romaine lettuce isn't bitter, if it's left unharvested, it becomes very bitter. And the same applied to our journey in Egypt. While we were originally invited as royal guests, right, we were relatives of Joseph, the viceroy, but we were eventually forced into bitter slavery. The maror appears twice on the Seder plate, as you can see. Can you see the maror twice here? Why twice? One is chazeret. Very good. It's used twice during the Seder. We'll go through that tomorrow. Okay, it's greens that we're going to use during the Seder for the Hillel sandwich. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay, let's just look at the bottom right, and then we'll go to the bottom left, and with that we'll conclude today. On the bottom right of the Seder plate, we have the sweet paste known as charoset. The charoset commemorates the thick mortar that the enslaved Jews were forced to use in Egypt when they labored to build the cities of Pitom and Ramses, the pyramids and everything. The charoset is a mixture of ground raw fruit, nuts, spices, mixed with wine. Again, there are various traditions how it's done. There's apples in it. We use apples and pear and dates and pomegranates and walnuts and almonds and cinnamon and ginger. That says different customs. Not my favorite. The truth is, it can be made nice and you can enjoy it. It's nice. Yes. So make sure to put some wine in it, which is, in this sense, symbolizes the plague of blood. And later on in the Seder, the maror is dipped into the charoset before it's eaten. We'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll discuss the significance of the charoset. So we talk here about the charoset and the maror, and we talk about the charoset as like a mortar kind of paste. And we'll conclude with the bottom left of your Seder plate, and we'll get into the details of all this tomorrow. So on the bottom left of the Seder plate, we have a vegetable known as karpas. Karpas, any vegetable really is fine, but once again, there are various customs. Some people use celery, others use parsnip, radish, cabbage. I grew up using raw onion and cooked potato. Yeah, raw onion and cooked potato. So like I said, you do what your family's custom is. I find it yummy. Raw onion and cooked potato, it's quite nice. It's a whole meal, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that comes to mind? Pardon? No, that's all. Well, tomorrow we'll get into the matzah, obviously. I mean, we discussed the matzah already. So I don't think we need to really talk about that now. But tomorrow we'll go into the actual Seder. Okay.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Why the matzah is not on the Seder?
Well, many people do keep it like under the Seder plate because you don't want you don't want the matzah to get wet. So, but many people, I think my father had a fancy Seder ka'ara, right? And inside it had a place for the matzahs. It had like drawers.
Because like that way it's almost like a separation.
Yeah, you could. People have nice ka'ara, but here was just a picture to focus on that. A lot of people do have the matzot inside the ka'ara. Okay, before we conclude, I'll tell you one more story. The story is about Reb Shmuel's two seders. And like now, Pesach is not far off. We're all getting ready. We're all cleaning and shopping.
10 days.
Yes. But the story I'm going to tell you now is about the home of Reb Shmuel. And they didn't have anything. They had nothing to prepare Pesach with. His family were accustomed to a life of poverty. While he was young, Reb Shmuel, he had this personal feeling that he doesn't like to take help from anyone. It was just his thing. Doesn't want handouts. Okay? He doesn't want to go to any of the organizations, doesn't want help. Even if that meant near starvation. He and his family would accept assistance only when it was offered. But he didn't like to go to anybody. He didn't like to ask and collect. And despite the difficulty, they never really uttered any complaints. They had strong faith that God would provide. Well, even though the poverty was sometimes so bad that people noticed and would lend a hand, Reb Shmuel never really spoke of the real desperate seriousness of the reality of his financial plight. Never told anyone about it. Except, or he wouldn't even tell his rabbi. His Rav was the Chose of Lublin. Any of you heard of him? Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak. I think his surname was Horowitz. I'm not certain. The Chose of Lublin, the Seer of Lublin. 1 year before Pesach, things reached a tipping point. Not a single kopek could be produced for him to purchase matzah. Forget about the 4 cups of wine for the members of his family. And Reb Shmuel was distraught. Even poverty, he knew, didn't absolve them from observing the holy mitzvahs. What's he going to do? Now, his Rebbe, the Chose of Lublin, became aware of this situation. And so he turned to one of his disciples, Reb Shlomo. He said, I want you to take whatever you can, and I want everything that this family needs for Pesach to celebrate, you send it over to Reb Shmuel. Okay? Go to Reb Shmuel. So the Chose, Rabbi Yaakov Yitzchak, tells his student, Reb Shlomo, to bring as much food as possible to the home of Reb Shmuel. Reb Shlomo hurried home and heard what his Rebbe told him. And although he intended to fulfill the request as soon as he arrived home, you know how it goes. Get home, his wife asked him to do something, the kids needed him, and he didn't get it done right away. It was only hours before Yom Tov when he ordered his driver to begin loading the wagon. Reb Shmuel sat in the empty Beit HaMedrash in the study hall, but even the book before him couldn't soothe his worries. It was the noon of Erev Pesach, and he and his family had nothing, absolutely not a morsel of food to eat. His stomach churned painfully with every passing minute, hampering his spiritual preparation for the holiday. But his faith remained absolute. Suddenly the door burst open and a child ran inside. Daddy, Papushka. I mean, it was in Russia, so he probably said Papushka. A wagon just stopped outside our house filled with all types of goodies. And the man wants to start unloading it right away because he needs to hurry. We don't know whether we should accept it or not. Papushka, what do you want we should do? Reb Shmuel bolted home with his child hanging off his sleeve, very excited. And he found the man busy at work, unloading Reb Shlomo's generosity to Reb Shmuel. There was matzah, there was wine, there was abundance of food, of delicacies, even clothing for the kids, all neatly packaged. Several weeks of stress evaporated instantly. Reb Shmuel raised his eyes to heaven. He whispered a short prayer and beamed at his family. Pesach this year, they finally have food to eat and enjoy. Well, inspired by God's kindness, Reb Shmuel felt an overwhelming spiritual resurgence and decided to conduct his Seder with all the possible Kabbalistic meditations and intentions that one could have, with every nuance of making it the very best Seder, with meaning, with purpose. He paused at every paragraph, he contemplated every meaning. The Seder was prolonged, but a special aura graced the proceedings. Even after reciting benching, Birkat HaMazon, grace after meals, Reb Shmuel's enthusiasm didn't dull. And the walls of his house shook heartily as he bellowed the songs of praise of Hashem. As morning began to peek from under the horizon, Reb Shmuel's Seder finally concluded, but he didn't feel tired. And he raced to the mikveh, eager to ready himself for the prayers of the Chag. Especially the first day, we have a special blessing. We say Birchat Tal. And still far from waning, the excitement, the gratitude lifted Reb Shmuel's prayers to new spiritual heights. He swayed to a prayer service like never before. That evening, however, exhaustion finally overcame him. A little bit like how I'm feeling now with just a few hours sleep. Well, he didn't sleep for 2 days. He was very worried. When he returned home from prayers, Reb Shmuel informed his family that he would take a short nap and they should wake him up in time for the second Seder. Of course, knowing the exertion that Reb Shmuel underwent, they ignored his request. They said, nah, he's very tired. Let him sleep a little longer. You know how it goes. And now it's close to midnight. Reb Shmuel wakes up. He looks at the clock, and you can imagine how he felt. He burst into the dining room, a look of panic in his eyes. Never had he neglected the mitzvah of eating afikoman before midnight, even on the second night where many people are lenient. Reb Shmuel dropped into his chair. He rushed through the Haggadah, mumbling the words very quickly and blankly. You know how it goes, like as if you're just, I don't know what to call it, saying it, not studying it, chugging the wine down, stuffing as much matzah into his mouth as he could chew at once. And this Seder, you can imagine, was not like his first Seder, devoid of any meaning of purpose as he battled the clock's swiftly moving hand. Reb Shmuel was ashamed. Surely even simpletons could conduct a better Seder. Guilt haunted him for the remainder of the Yom Tov. And as soon as it concluded, he scrambled at the first opportunity possible to rush to visit his Rebbe, the Chaz of Lublin. And he really felt terrible. Before Reb Shmuel even opened his mouth, the Chaz of Lublin said to no one in particular, as though thinking of himself loudly, let us examine Reb Shmuel's Seders. The first was performed with fiery passion and enthusiasm, though the spiritual commotion amounted to barely anything. The second, however, the broken-hearted and the spirit have deemed that Seder extraordinary. The Chaz of Lublin peered at Reb Shmuel, who stood there wide-eyed. He said, your second Seder, done purely for God and with nary the sense of self, has overturned the worlds above, as nothing has ever been experienced quite like this. Morai v'rabotai, I want to say, as much as we are going to learn about the Seder, as much as I said that the Seder needs meaning and purpose, but we should also know the main thing is to do it for the sake of God. We see that Reb Shmuel spent the day of Erev Pesach in the study hall. He would be making a Seder. He had absolute trust in God that everything would happen, and that requires preparation. Every religious experience is heightened and elevated when we prepare for it and we deepen our appreciation for it. In a similar vein, this is why it's customary to take a few moments before we daven every morning, to take a few moments and to study, to meditate, to contemplate, to think about the greatness of God. It really makes all the difference in the world. But I see also the gratitude in the story, which is clearly one of the major themes of Pesach. Reb Shmuel recognized that God did something drastic for him, something drastically positive. And that's why he resolved to reciprocate in that fashion as well. He decided to hold the most amazing Seder ever. Hakarat Hatov means that we show appreciation. It's an important midah. When God is kind to us in an unexpected way, it behooves us to respond in an unexpected manner as well, by doing something extraordinary in return. And the story teaches us the value of doing a mitzvah, even when we're not feeling inspired and motivated to do so. In fact, the story teaches us the value in doing a mitzvah, especially when we're uninspired and unmotivated. Think for a moment. When you do a mitzvah, when you're in the mood and feeling all holy and spiritually sensitive, then to a degree you're fulfilling your own desire to feel meaningful and spiritual. But when you're not inspired at all, then the mitzvah is only about fulfilling the commandment of the one above. And that, my friends, is more precious than anything else. And so, the story is told about a chassid who once came to the Tzemach Tzedek, and he lamented that he doesn't learn as much as he should because he doesn't have a geschmack, a pleasure in it. He asked, Rebbe, what should I do if I have no geschmack, no delight in learning? And the Rebbe, in classical Jewish fashion, answered him, how do we Jews answer questions? He said, what should I do? I do have a geschmack in learning. A mitzvah means a commandment and also a connection. The ultimate connection is forged when we do this act because we are commanded to do so. So, if you're not feeling inspired, if you're not in the mood, that's an amazing opportunity to prepare yourself, to put yourself into doing it. Now you have the opportunity to serve God in a way that was not possible when you were feeling inspired. And with that, my friends, come back tomorrow for a little bit more inspiration. Please enjoy a chametz lunch today, and we'll continue tomorrow with prepping for Pesach. Sei gesund, everyone. See you then. Thank you.
We didn't need the book today.
No, maybe tomorrow. We'll see.
No, yeah.
I don't know what happened. Did you guys lose the sound? Vivian, are you able to hear?
Yes, Rabbi, I heard most of it. You were on the phone.
Okay, good. Excellent.
Thank you.
Like I said,
Very
see you all tomorrow.